Hi everyone, I'm going to show you a great game from the 1962 Chess Olympiad. In the match, Soviet Union versus the USA, and the Soviet Union won this event. They had a very strong team. On board 1, Mikhail Botvinnik, who's a world champion. Board 2, Tigran Petrosian, who's to become world champion the next year. Board 3, Boris Spassky, obviously a future world champion. Board 4, Paul Keres, one of the strongest players never to become world champion. And on the reserve boards, Geller and Mikhail Tal, a former world champion. So an incredibly strong team. USA had Bobby Fischer on board 1, and his famous game with Botvinnik ended in a draw, and that's featured in his book, My 16 Memorable Games. But the game we're going to look at today is Boris Spassky versus Larry Evans on board 3. Larry Evans, Bobby Fischer's good friend, he wrote the introductions to all the games in My 16 Memorable Games. So Spassky is white, opens with d4. We see knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, and bishop to g7. The king's Indian. Spassky e4, d6, and f3, the same each variation. Now the move f3 does a few things. It strengthens the centre by supporting e4. It keeps the knight off g4 because we want to play bishop to e3 next without getting harassed by the knight. And it also supports the move g2 to g4 if we want to play that later. And in this game we see white attacking on the king side and black looking for play on the queen side. And so Evans here plays c6. We get bishop to e3, a6, queen to d2, and then b5. And Spassky castles queenside. And this formation with white castling queenside, having a queen on d2 and a bishop on e3, you see it in many openings. Here we have it in the King's Indian, and you'll also see this in the Perk defence, except with his c4 pawn still on c2, and in the Sicilian Dragon as well, but again the pawn's on c2 and the d4 pawn and the c pawn have been exchanged off. And white's plan here is very simple. It's going to advance the h pawn and exchange it off or give it up. The idea is just to open this file for the rook, so that after black's castled kingside, you can exchange your bishops off here. The queen comes in and you've got the rook and the queen putting pressure on the h7 pawn, and then you just attack this knight, and the knight can't move because otherwise queen takes h7, checkmate. And here Evans takes on c4, a move which I don't really like, because after the natural response bishop takes c4, white's just developing his pieces to great positions, and black spent 4 moves on a6, c6, b5 and b takes c4, and he's not got anything to show for it. So Evans castles kingside now, and that's a cue for Spassky to immediately launch into an attack, h4. And a good way to stop the advance of the h-pawn is just to play h5. And then white has to spend some more time trying to open up the position with g4. But Evans plays d5, and Spassky doesn't want to exchange pawns here because his e4 pawn is supported by the f3 pawn, and he can recapture and keep a very strong centre. And if he was to take on d5, he'd be left with an isolated pawn on d4. So bishop to b3, staying on this diagonal and keeping pressure on this d pawn. So if a queen or knight were to move, this pawn could fall. D takes e4, and then wasting no time, h5. Now black's got a couple of options here. He can either take the h pawn with a knight, or he can leave it and allow the exchange on g6. And in the game Evans took on f3. I'll just show you what would happen if he took on h5. We get g4, kicking a knight away. So we've opened up this h file. Bishop to h6. And if the bishops are exchanged, the queen comes in. And now we've got this situation where if this knight moves, we've got mate on h7. So the knight's protected by another knight. Knight takes e4. And e6 is played to give the king an escape square on e7, because otherwise we could play knight to g5, knight takes h7, and we'd threaten to exchange off his knight and come in on h8. So the rook needs to move across, and then a king to f8, and then escape to e7. So e6 as an escape square, g5. Now if a knight was to take this knight, we've got mate straight away. So knight to h5, and we've got a really nice finish. Rook takes knight, g takes h5, opening up the queen side of f6 for knight f6 check. Has to recapture, otherwise it's mate on h7. Knight takes, g takes, And the only way to avoid mate in g7 is for the queen to give herself up for the f6 pawn. So back in this position, Evans took on f3, Spassky took on g6, and Evans recaptured. Now if he hadn't have recaptured and just took on g2 first, that would allow pawn takes f7 check, king to h8, queen takes pawn, and now black's got to contend with threats on both the g and the h files. So if we had something like knight b to d7, knight f3, rook to b8, rook g1, and black's in trouble. So the pawn takes on g6 and bishop to h6. So we're only on the 14th move and already black's position looks pretty scary. So he takes on g2 and Spassky plays rook to h4. And he plays this because he wants to keep the rook on the h file. He could have taken on g2, but then we get the bishop takes with check, and when the rook recaptures, it's time for king to g7, with the idea that if the rook retreats, then we got rook to h8, and it just takes the pressure off the h file. However, it turns out there's a great move here for white as well. He can play bishop takes f7. Obviously the king can't take the rook because the queen takes g6 mate. And if a rook takes, this is also mate. Queen takes, king goes back, rook h8 and mate on the next move. And if king takes, queen takes g6, king to e6 is the only move. And you can tell just by looking at the position that this isn't going to end well for black. d5 check is the move here, opens up the position. Pawn takes, knight takes, and black's best move here is to give up his queen for the knight and a rook, bearing in mind he's already a bishop up. If you play something else like bishop to b7 and it's mate, knight to f4, he's only got one move, king to e5, chase the king around, only one move in each of these, forking with king, queen and rook, king to c4, king to d3, and then you've got a choice of checkmates here. There we go. And if black does give up his queen, rook takes, knight can't take because it's pinned, queen to g2 check, the knight goes in the way, knight to e2, threatening knight to c3 check, winning this knight, protected with a bishop, knight to c3, king to d4, and then rook to h4. He's going to win a piece back, and black's got his king in the centre and his pieces in the corner. But if we go back to the game, rook h4 was played, knight to g4, which stops white's queen coming in at h6, bishop takes, king takes, queen takes pawn, and here white's threatening to win a bishop and a knight for the rook, but also to move this knight and get this rook into play. And Evans plays knight to h6. Now as it turns out, it would have been better if he had played rook to h8, just getting rid of all the pressure down the h file and just give up two minor pieces, as he's already 2 pawns up. And this position slightly better for white because of the piece activity, but after knight to h6 we get knight to f3, bring this knight into the game and also threatening to bring this rook into the game as well on either the h file or the g file. So knight to f5, hoping to kick this rook away, which retreats and obviously stays along the h file. Queen to d6, and this is played to protect the g6 pawn, because if we had something like queen to c7, then after the knight comes into e5, if we play a random move like bishop to d7, then bishop takes f7 is a problem. We're threatening on g6, after rook takes, queen takes, king f8, black's getting mated. So queen to d6, knight to e5 anyway, and knight to d7 to challenge that knight. We get a nice simple move, knight to e4. Rather than do something about the challenge for the knight on e5, Spassky just brings another piece into the action with tempo. Queen drops back to c7, and then the other rook comes into the game. Now black has to do something about this. He can't take the knight yet because the rooks come in with checkmate. So he plays a rook to g8, giving his king an escape square. Rook check, king f8, rook takes f7 check, king e8. And here Spassky played a brilliant move, and you can pause the video if you want and see if you can find it. I'll show this move in a few seconds. Okay, he played queen takes pawn. Now straight away he's threatening this rook on g8, and the queen can't be taken, otherwise the rook's coming again with checkmate. So instead, Evans, he's completely lost now, but he played knight takes e5, so that after queen takes rook, the king can come to d7. And here Spassky ended the game with rook f8, double check. So double check, the king always has to move, and if we get king takes f8, queen takes his mate, and if king to d7, well, could play bishop over queen, but bishop e6 is also checkmate. So after rook f8 check, Evans resigned. And also in this position there's another checkmate in 2 instead of the rook f8 double check. See if you can find it. I'll show it in a few seconds. It is knight to f6. Now if king to d8, queen takes his mate, and after pawn takes, the rook is now attacking d7, so queen takes his mate again. So a brilliant attacking game by Spassky, and it's really instructive, showing some of the ideas on attacking a kingside fianchetto position. Hope you enjoyed the game. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below.